we are in fasting month now, and I think Pak Kim will discuss more on what already perceived by the Westerners, that Islam is always associated with anti-modernism, traditional, and oriented toward the past. Then we will see if Islam can go hand in hand with modernity. And Pak Kim will discuss it from the anthropological perspective. So, Pak Kim, please. Class is yours now.
Yep. Thank you, Rainbow, and good morning, everyone. And this is the fourth lecture that I have prepared from March to April, and this is the final one, and in this semester. And because I'm a bit, I started to be used to the lecture. It is sorry that I cannot continue in May and July, but I think next semester I may have a chance to see you again. And today the topic is, as is introduced by Rainbow, is about Islam, and Islam especially in Indonesia. And because I have been working on Islam for quite some time, and some of the materials that I prepared for today's lecture is actually from my field research in Indonesia. I hope this will give something for us to think about how, as Barimbo brilliantly proposed, that how outsiders, especially the people from the West, think about Islam, especially in Indonesia. I share the material, and I hope it is shown clearly. And today, because it is the last lecture, I shorten the time of my presentation. Maybe I finish it within an hour, and after that, we can freely discuss about today's or previous topics that we have discussed about Southeast Asia. And the title of today's lecture is Islam and Modernity in Indonesia. So before we examine Islamic modernities that I have been looking for in Indonesia, we'll briefly see how Westerners look at Islam, the relationship between Islam and modernity in this world. And after that, I will introduce a new concept, which is called multiple modernities or alternative modernities. And after that, we will discuss cases from Indonesia. There are heaps of examples, but I chose four topics, and all of these are quite familiar with you. First is Hijab, halal, and Islamic finance. And finally, I'll very briefly talk about transmission of religious knowledge these days. And when the Westerners or the outsiders look at Islam in Islamic countries, they usually characterize it as pre-modern or anti-modern, and yeah, it is traditional, and Muslims are quite oriented to the past. These are the dominant views how Westerners conceive Islam in Middle East and in Southeast Asia too. And I think the major reason why they make this sort of equation, namely Islam equals anti-modern, is the trend in Islamic countries to apply religious teachings in the public sphere. So what I'm saying is that if religion works for the private life of religious followers, they believe, the Westerners think that it is okay. It is modern enough. It is not traditional, anti-modern. But because in Western countries, religion rarely appears in the public sphere, in the discourse, in the public sphere, for them, it is unfamiliar, and they believe that it is the characters of Islam that is quite different from religions in Western countries. And I have 4 pictures here. The pictures in the far left is something like mass demonstration in Indonesia, anti-Ahok. And we can see Bank Islam, and then we can see a Muslim woman wearing a hijab in public. And the last one is about terror. So these pictures, which transmits from the media, brings a certain perception that Islam is quite traditional. Orientation of Muslims are not to the present or to the future, but back to the past. That's the dominant view Westerners usually have. And it is also, it also applies to the academic works of the Westerners. So before we go further, we can examine the concept of modernity, and it is quite relative one. And you may hear about postmodern or something like that. So it is a bit controversial, which defines the characters of modernity. And it is one of the concepts. So it tells us that the present condition of existence that is fundamentally different from the forms of human experience that existed in the past. So it is relative one. So now we are living in the modern world, and 10 years afterward, we are also living in the modern world. And in this concept of modernity in the West, one of the key elements is related to religion. So they have a view that the modern world is relatively freed from the influence of religion. So when religious actions or religious behaviors or religious representations are not clearly seen in the public sphere, it is usually called modernity. And this kind of assumption has originated from the idea of secularism in the 19th century. So at the time, there was big social science figures like Karl Marx, Max Weber, Emil Durkheim, and Freud. All of them supported the idea of secularism, namely that religion will disappear in the future. That's the idea that they have supported about 100 years ago. And actually these figures like Marx, Weber, Durkheim, and Freud, all of them are very big names in social science, and much of their works are still relevant, except for the position of religion in the modern world. So they say that they believe that as the society progresses, influence of religion will decrease and religion will eventually disappear. So this idea of secularism actually is incorporated into the idea of modernity. But in the middle of the 20th century, in contrast to their some sort of prediction, religion has not disappeared in this world. So some social scientists try to revise the idea of what big fathers of social science, and they proposed a new idea of secularism. Yeah, it is called new secularism, or a modified secularism, proposed by such scholars as Peter Berger or Brian Wilson. And they believe that religion will not disappear in this world while we are modernizing or the world progresses. Religion will not disappear, but influence religion will be confined to the private domain. So in the public sector, it is difficult to apply religious ideas, but in the private sector, means private beliefs and actions, religion still have meanings and will not disappear. So that's the idea of new secularism. So whichever position we take, whether we take the classical idea of secularism or we take the position of new secularism, the position of religion should be confined to the private life. So you pray, you carry out your religious duties at home, but not in the public domain. So that's the idea that the modernity concept has been built on in the Western countries. But these days, we still observe that religion is important in personal and public life. So even if we have some paradigm, if it cannot be applied, it should be revised. Yeah, that's a very simple way, but it is hard to accept this sort of idea. So still a lot of scholars still believe that religion should be excluded from the public life. So from that position, it can be said Muslim countries are somewhat exceptional or somewhat unusual or somewhat extraordinary or something like that. They do not consider it as normal, namely that in the modern circumstances, religion still has its position in public life. They do not want to accept that, but they consider it as something like exceptional, unusual, extraordinary, and somewhat deviated. So it is unfair that because the condition of Muslim countries are different from the West, these are considered as exceptional, as abnormal or something like that. So a new concept appeared, and it is called something like multiple modernities or alternative modernities, proposed by Eisenstadt or Gaunkar at early 2000. We can see the appearance of these concepts. And these scholars criticize the Western-centric concept of modernity. And instead, they propose Western modernity, Western form of modernity is not the only form of modernity, all countries in the world will follow the path of Western experiences. So they believe that we have to think about plurality in the form of modernity. So not singular modernity, but a plural modernities or something like that. So that's the idea that they propose. And these ideas are based on the views that actually the modernity is the result of continuous interactions between modern and what is considered as traditional, and Western and indigenous and cosmopolitan and local. So we have to see the appearance of modernity in certain country as the product of continuous interactions between these two different flows of life. And then we have to think about the process of creative adaptation, where humans define themselves as modern beings and strive to realize their own modernity. So they changes the perspective. So before this time, we have some sort of ideal form of modernity in Western countries. Then other non-Western countries follow the path of the West. That was the assumption, but we have to rethink, because all of us are living in the modern condition. So when we talk about modernity in certain place, then we have to think about the interactions and creative adaptations between what is called the Western modern and what is called the indigenous and local modern. So these two should be interacted, should be considered equally when you talk about modernity in non-Western countries. And this concept is also based on the idea of agency, human agency, autonomous human practices, and through which the process of selection, adaptation, interpretation, and reinterpretation and reconstruction of modernity is carried out. So if I summarize their ideas, that all of the people living in this world try to be modern. So the contents, so what they consider modern are different in different places. So we have to have more plural perspective on how to look at the idea of modernity in the modern world. So not we are following the model of Western modernity, but it can be a source, one source to forge our own modernity. But it is not the only way people outside the Western world try to follow. That's the idea that they have proposed. So with these ideas in mind, the questions for today's lecture is something like this. So can Islam and modernity be compatible? And that's the question that we are pursuing for today's lecture. And when we rephrase the question, we can say that are Islamic practices modern? Or what does Islamic modernity look like in Indonesia? These are the questions that I try to answer with my lecture, and we will discuss after the lecture, which will be finished within half an hour or something like that. So there are heaps of areas that we can talk about Islamic modernity in Indonesia, but I just selected 4 areas, as I said before. One is, hijab, headscarf, and halal, finance, transmission of religious knowledge. I chose these 4 because I've done some research on these topics. So because we are in the middle of Ramadan, I think you can find out some other areas for further research in the future. So where we can find out Islamic modernity or characters in Islamic modernity in Indonesia, in addition to these 4 areas. So before we go further, I will briefly summarize how scholars of Islam in Indonesia have conceptualized the present condition of Islam in Indonesia. and they frequently use a concept Islamization. Actually, the Islamization in Indonesia started from 15th century when Islam entered into Indonesia, but we can find out new phase of Islamization about 1970s and 1980s. So compared to the previous time, Islam in Indonesia has been changed enormously and in some sense qualitatively from the 1980s, and the main direction of change was something like that. So before this time, the literal interpretation of Islamic teachings were rarely used by Indonesian Muslims. But after 1980s, it is emphasized that the textual interpretation of the Quran and Hadith should be maintained in the life of Muslims. So because of this trend, non-Islamic practices and beliefs have been criticized and have been attacked. These practices have not disappeared, but still we admit that these practices are now little by little marginalized. So if there are a lot of Muslims who stick to traditional Islamic practices and beliefs in Indonesia, but still they are not brave enough to express their own religiosity in public, even if they do it in their private life. So, and in addition to this, the movement, Islamization movement in Indonesia after the 1980s, tried to apply Islamic teachings in all areas of daily life. So all of the topics, subtopics that we will discuss is related to daily life, the clothes, food, and how do they participate in religious activities. And these are the general characteristics of Islamization in Indonesia. And there are some sociological characters too. And these are the fact that Islamization in Indonesia was initiated and driven by university students. So before this time, 1980s, for the university students or for intellectuals, Islam was considered traditional, and Islam was viewed sometimes quite viewed to be related to backwardness. But after the 1980s, because Islamization was driven by university students, Islam was given a very positive image. So we know that university students represent a very positive values in the society. They are well educated, and we know that the youngsters like you are modern, progressive, and open, something like that. So because Islamic change in Indonesia was initiated by university students, Islam in Indonesia have been given a very positive image. If you follow Islamic practices, you are not considered as backward, you are not considered as traditional, but you are considered to be modern and progressive. And in addition to this, while the Islamization has been going on in Indonesia, as we discussed last month, that economic development in Indonesia has been accelerated. So it is not only applied to Indonesia, but also to Malaysia. So very peculiar phenomena in Indonesia and Malaysia is that Islamization and economic development have gone hand in hand, side by side. It's a very peculiar phenomenon in Islamic world. So I just brought two data that we can discuss. At first is the ratio of economic growth in Indonesia, and the other one is ratio of economic growth in Turkey. So as we can see, for the last 10 or 20 years, the economic growth in Indonesia has continuously going upward. So we have more than 4% of economic growth in Indonesia. But in the case of Turkey, as we can see, for the same period of time, or just a little bit more, is 20 years period, and we can see that they experienced minus economic growth for the last 20 years. And recently, Turkey also is also experiencing some sort of economic crisis. So in that sense, Malaysia is quite similar to Indonesia. So in this sense, for the last 20 years, Indonesia has been going on furthering the process of Islamization, and at the same time, they have achieved a high rate of economic growth in Indonesia, which means that even if you are stick to Islamic practices, economic development can be achieved. That's the lesson that Indonesia and Malaysia have learned from the experience of last 20 to 30 years of Islamization. And when we look at the whole Islamic countries, it is very special and peculiar, because countries in the Middle East, countries in the North Africa, the major Muslim countries, there has been no country which achieved Islamization and economic development at the same time. Most of the economic condition has not been that good in Middle East and North Africa. So condition of Islam in Southeast Asia, especially Indonesia and Malaysia, have different from those in Middle Eastern countries. And that means that Indonesia and Malaysia have a very special position, or have provided a very peculiar cases with which we can examine the issue of Islam and modernity in the modern world. So these are the ideas or peculiarities of Indonesia, namely that those who drove the process of Islamization have been university students and intellectuals. And economic condition, while the Islamization has been going on, has been quite good compared to other countries. So these are the conditions with which we can examine the problem of Islam and modernity in Indonesia. And these four sub-areas of today's lecture are actually quite familiar with you. So you may easily understand what I'm trying to say. So what is important is that these phenomena, when we combined these four areas of phenomena, we can find out a new concept of modernities in Indonesia. So the first one that I tried to explain is about hijab. Yeah, we call it jilbab in Indonesia, but anyway. So hijab has been a very controversial item in Islamic teachings, and we have a multi-interpretations of hijab. And these are some of the previous interpretations about hijab. And we have a very conservative and patriarchal interpretation of it, namely that hijab is clothing to hide female beauty, and female beauty is the source of temptation. So that's a very conservative, and we can say it is patriarchal because it is male-oriented idea. And secondly, at the end of the conservative interpretation, we have liberal interpretation. And it says that teachings of hijab is a moral recommendation to wear clothes in accordance with the socio-cultural conditions and historical traditions. So if you choose clothes in according to your social norm, that's okay. And if hijab belongs to that social norm, you can try it. But if not, you don't need to. But you should wear clothes how can I say, morally, or in according to the customs that applies to your places of living. And we have some more radical interpretation of hijab too, a woman-centric. I at first tried to put something like feminist, but yeah, it's a bit different connotation. So I just use woman-centric interpretation. So they view hijab as a medium with which women express their religious, political, or economic orientation. So in some areas of Muslim countries, wearing more conservative hijab can be a very clear voice of Muslim women to demonstrate their religious orientation, to show their religiosity, faithfulness, or something like that. But in other parts of Islamic countries, not to wear hijab can be a sign of their expression of political orientation. So women employs hijab as a weapon, as a medium to show their political and economic orientation. So these three have been the main ideas or main perspectives to examine wearing of hijab. But in Indonesia and in other parts of Muslim world too, we have seen an emergence of new interpretation in the 2000s. So they perceive hijab as a means to pursue aesthetic beauty, as an object of fashion. So these are quite new phenomena, and it is quite widespread. And Indonesia is not an exception. It also leads this trend. So we have a new group of Muslim women called themselves as hijabers. So they devised a new concept, hijabers. And before Indonesians, yeah, it is a bit strange that they have to use English rather than Indonesian. But anyway, because they want to propose a totally different, a revolutionary ideas on hijab, they may use English words rather than Indonesian. So they call themselves as hijaber. And hijabers are those who pursue beauty, fashion, something like that. So these are some of the ideas of hijabers. I believe some of you who are present today also belong to this group of hijabers, whether you expressed it clearly or indirectly, you somewhat accept adopt some of the ideas from the Hijabers. So they oppose a very simple equation that has been present in Indonesia as well as in other parts of Islamic countries, that hijab equals to accepting something like textual teachings, anti-consumerism, acceptance of patriarchal control. So they oppose these sorts of simple equation. And instead of that, they propose that Muslim women can pursue both piety and beauty. So this is the very simple but very essential idea of Hijabers. And I think because they knew that this sort of statement may bring controversial result in Indonesian society, because there are a lot of conservative scholars, Islamic scholars, who oppose this sort of idea. So they, instead of involving themselves into some sort of debates with Islamic conservative traditional scholars, they depend on a very simple Islamic teachings. So when I analyze some of the books written by Hijabers, yet it is likely that they do not want to be involved in religious debate with Islamic scholars, but instead they try to put forward a very simple Islamic teaching, saying that Allah is the most beautiful and Allah loves beauty. So that's something like a very golden teaching they try to employ. So with this religious teaching, they can say boldly that Muslims are permitted to pursue both piety and beauty. And they also put emphasis on intention rather than the literate meanings of scriptures. So they maintain that it is inappropriate to evaluate others by clothing and appearance. So you are given a freedom to express yourself, but you should not evaluate others by clothing and appearance. So that's the idea that they have proposed. Sorry. And I can see that from their ideas and from their practices, the Hijabers have expressed their desires to be religious and at the same time to be modern. And for them, these two, to be modern and to be religious, are not contrasting ideas. You can be modern, in some sense westernized, but at the same time, you can be Islamic, you can be religious. So I like to use the term hybrid modernity. So modernity pursued by Hijabers is not an imitation of the West, but their own version of modernity. They firmly believe that you can be religious and at the same time, you can be westernized, you can be more cosmopolitan, you can be modern. So that's the idea that they try to stick to. So I think that the appearance of Hijabers and what they try to demonstrate reflects the changes in Indonesian society that have followed Western development and successfully, and the path of Islamization over the last 30 years. So as I said before, Indonesia has successfully been on the road to economic development, but at the same time, Indonesia also experienced Islamization. So these changes have affected the ways Hijabers look at their clothes, look at their life. So in that sense, Hijabers try to independently interpret the expansion of global consumption culture, the strengthening of Middle Eastern influence and local needs, and creatively accommodate these to their lives. So from what they think, what they say, what they express, I believe that they have done these independently and creatively. So here we can find out the mode Islamic teachings and Western influences or globalization interact. So we can find out a new form of modernity from their ideas, from their practices. And secondly, I would like to focus on the issue of halal. So it is very self-evident that halal is religious, halal is Islamic, and it is halal, stick to the principle of halal is one of the sources from which Westerners view Islam as traditional. Because the Westerners think that when you apply religious rules to the problem of eating, yeah, it is not that modern, but it is traditional. It is oriented to the backward conditions of our existence. So as you can see, for example, about 20 years or 30 years in Indonesia, people rarely talked about halal. So they just eat and they never think about the halalness of the food or others that they use. There have been some problems, something like problems of noodles or bakso or something like that, which contains what contains oils from pig, something like that. But it sometimes happens. But apart from this, halal has not been considered so important in our ordinary life. But it has changed. So these days, a lot of restaurants or a lot of products use halal as their strategy to promote their products. So even if halal has been considered as religious issues, actually there have been no consensus on the reasons why we Muslims have to use halal food. And it is written in the scriptures, but there have been controversies over why, for example, pigs are forbidden to eat, something like that. But these days, in the discourse about halal food, it appears that halal foods are related to health. It is forbidden. These forbidden items were selected because these are related to our health problem, something like that. And as you can see, the survey result on halal food, some of Muslims, and I think quite a lot of Muslims actually think halal is good for our health or something like that. So non-halal foods will have negative impact on your body. And more than 80% or 90%, they agree strongly that non-halal foods will bring negative impacts on our body. And the other question, halal food will have good influence. Yeah, it is also, it also records a very high positive answering rate. So some of you might have heard about the word toiban. So these days we are talking about halal toiban. So toiban means something like good, and when it expands to food, we can say that it is healthy. So halal, the concept expression halal toiban is quite popular these days, but about 20 years ago, before the 1990s, this concept halal toiban was rarely used. So at that time, halal was not combined to the concept toiban. But these days, because halal is considered healthy, so the toiban is combined more and more to the concept halal. And because of this trend of the society, the Indonesian government has passed a Halal Product Assurance Act about 10 years ago, 2014. And it was expected to be applied at the end of something like 2019, but it was postponed continually. So maybe 2 or 3 years afterwards, they tried to enforce the Halal Product Assurance Act. But anyway, whether it is still enforced or not, what is important is that the government enacted Halal Product Assurance Act. And in the act, we can see that coverage of act is quite extensive. So not just materials, whether food contains pigs or something like that, but it also proposed to examine the process of production process, slaughtering process, and production sites, the cleanliness of production site and production equipment, storage sites, distribution processes, manufacturers or serving process or something like that. So all the processes from the production to the distribution and consumption was dealt with by this act. And Halal Product Assurance Act is the first law in the Islamic world, which means that in the world, this is the first one to authorize the government to manage halal products. So we know that before this law, halal was important, but halal was considered as an issue managed by the community. So the community deals with the issue of halal, not the government. But with the inaction of Halal Product Assurance Act, the situation was changed. So when we examine discourses related to halal these days in Indonesia, I got an impression that halal discourse resorts heavily to that of modern consumers in the West. So you know that modern consumers in the West are also keenly interested in food, but their criterion to think about food is different, of course, different from halal. But anyhow, when we look at how people think about halal and how halal is treated in Indonesia, it has similarities to the discourse, the management or policies of government in the West. So we are focusing on the issue of health. And we are thinking about consumers' right to have halal food, halal restaurants, halal products is considered as consumers' right. And some of the industrialists, some of the producers say that halal brings some sort of product competitiveness in the world market. So this is the picture of halal stores in New York. So the halal foods also have attractions to the Westerners because they believe it is healthy or it is something like that. So producers of halal say that halal can be a criteria to promote, to increase the product competitiveness in the world or something like that. And the role and the Halal Act illustrate the law of government to protect consumers. So the discourse is related to halal. It is based on religion, religious ideas, but these days, the recent halal discourse is related closely to the ideas of consumer protection or health food or something like that. So I think that the institutionalization of halal is the result of the interaction between modern changes and religious interpretations. So we have religious teachings of halal, but at the same time, how we practice this idea, put this idea into practice, is also related to modern changes. Modern consumers who are thinking about their health and their consumers' right or something like that. So the surge of halal in Indonesia for the last 2 decades are closely related to that sort of modern changes. That's the idea that I propose. And we can also use the similar idea, we can use the similar argument for the emergence of Islamic finance in Indonesia. So the first Islamic financial institution in Indonesia was bank, Islamic bank, Sharia, and after that, insurance. So these started early 1990s. The background of introducing Islamic finance may be confined to these 3. So Muslims have a desire to use interest-free financial transactions. And without interest-free, without interest, actually bank could not do their business. So Muslims have to find out new ways of managing banks, and it is called profit sharing mechanism. So rather than use interest, they use profit sharing methods to dealing with modern financial transactions. And after that, in addition to this, the Indonesian government of the time have a willingness to develop Islamic finance because Malaysia, early 1990s, Malaysia started to become the center of Islamic finance in the world. So Indonesian government tried to follow the path Malaysia have developed at the time. So at first sight, not to use interest in finance is considered insane, considered inappropriate by economists. They believe that interest is the essential part of modern finance. But after Islamic finance starts, they also believe that now, profit sharing is another way to carry out financial transactions in modern world. So after bank and insurance, Islamic finance has expanded to all areas of finance developed in the West. So some of you are not familiar with these, and actually I'm not that familiar with these terms, but we know that there are bonds, securities, stocks, lease, and it's a very strange financial transactions called derivatives. So commodity future trading. So they transact oils or other commodities for the future, not for the present. We call it options. So credit mortgages, something like that. So when the Islamic finance started in the early 1990s, they think it would be confined to just bank and insurance, or traditional ones. But for the last 20 years, it turned out that Islamic finance can extend its mode of transaction to these new financial products, which are transacted in the West. So when we look at the stock exchange market, because Western stock exchange market is based on the rule of gambling or something like that, which is forbidden in Islam. At first sight, it was viewed impossible for Islamic finance institutions to invest in stock markets, but they find out their own ways to do so. So they have made some sort of criteria for selecting investing stocks for Islamic financial institutions. So you can see religious criteria, the company that Islamic bank or insurance company invest should not do business in gambling. So, and it should be accompanied by actual transactions of goods and services. These are related to religious teachings. But anyway, they accommodate these religious teachings to make it possible to invest. So these are some of the ways how Islamic financial institutions, the banks and investment companies or like that, they try to modify Islamic teachings to suit for the modern financial products. And you may see that these are the picture on the left side is Bitcoin. And we don't know whether Bitcoin is, in Islamic terms, permissible or not, but still it is applied to the Islamic teachings, can be applied to modern product. So I've heard that MUI, the Majelis Ulama Indonesia, also back up the transaction of Bitcoin. So whenever there's new financial products appearing from the West, it is it is adopted to the Islamic financial environment in Indonesia. So actually, we can say that why Islamic banks do not use interest, because they want to solve the problem of capitalism, that of exploitation or something like that. So they change it into the system of profit sharing. And it turns out that there are no limits in changing Western style financial products into Islamic styles. So in that sense, we can say the Islamic finance accommodates religious principle to the modern financial needs, modern financial environment. So in that sense, when Westerners see that the banks does not use interest, they think that, yeah, it is almost unworkable, and it is traditional. They want to go back to the history when there is no modern banks. But it turns out that Islamic financial institutions have successfully accommodate themselves to the modern financial situation. So every transactions in Western banks, transactions done by Western banks can be transacted, can be done, carried out by Islamic financial institutions. So these are the ways how they accommodate themselves to the modern financial condition. And this is the last one that I like to present today, that we can see an emergence of new ways of transmitting religious teachings, namely the sermons, preachings, or something like that. So about 20 years ago, we cannot expect this sort of concert style preaching going on in Indonesia. So at that time, we have traditional settings, mosque or individual houses, and there are groups of jama'ah, and there's a preacher who are quite old or something like that. So you can imagine, and it is still going on. So we can imagine a traditional picture of preaching sermon. But these days, we can find out it's something like a concert, boys and girls group or something like that. And you can see two examples, the posters, a poster and concert like sermon in Indonesia. So I don't know, because we are attacked by the coronavirus. I think that this sort of mass mobilization might not be carried out for the last 2 years. But I think after we can live like without corona, I think these mass concerts will be carried out in the future. So it evolves the way how the preachers transmit their ideas to the mass, to the Muslims. A lot of Muslim masses has also changed. So if we just look at these two pictures, we can say there is something like a top concert or like that. So there's a new development in Indonesia, and we have to think about the influence of globalism, influence of IT in development, how they brings impacts on the ways religion is discussed in public. And I was also a bit surprised. It was also recalls of Ramadan in 2019. So they are making some sort of ranking among preachers. So it's something like Billboard chart in US about related to palm music. So they make some small enquetes, survey, and they say that who is ranked at first among the preachers in Indonesia, and Abdul Somad, dia menjadi nomor satu, being followed by Bahauddin, Mustafa Bisri, or something like that. So Hakim has been famous for the last 20 years. But anyway, so the thing is that people, what they think about preachers is not what they thought about preachers about 20 years ago. So they are like pastors these days, and they try to transmit their ideas in a new fashion. When we go to the traditional preaching scene, the audience are sitting and the preacher read the scriptures and add their own views. And it is not that interesting. There are not many attractions in these preachings. But these days, these preachers try to find out new ways to deliver their message to the masses. And these new ways are quite similar to to Western pop groups, Western concerts, Western mass mobilization. And we have, Instagrams. So a lot of SNS, and it is the front page of Abdul Somad, and it says, because I browsed it from Korea, we have some Korean script here. So it says the followers of Abdul Somad was more than 4 million. And Ustad Dasad Latif, he has subscribers of 1.3 million. So these preachers actively use SNS, Instagram, or YouTube or something like that. And these are the new ways how Islamic teachings are transmitted these days. So the modern technology is actively appropriated by Islamic preachers, and these could not be imagined about 20 or 30 years ago. We just think about a traditional mass gatherings in Indonesia. But we have now new styles. They use actively YouTube or Instagram to find out their followers, and the ways how they transmit the ideas of their sermons have been changed. I'm at the moment trying to compare the contents of their sermons with contents of sermons delivered by traditional religious teachers, something like Gustur or something like that. But there are some researchers saying that the messages they are delivering these days are quite different. They depends heavily on personal experiences rather than Quranic passages. Traditionally, we know that they read Quranic passages and that adds some interpretation and adds a little bit of personal experiences. But these days, these new preachers, they focus more on their personal experiences. So once Edward Said criticized Orientalism because, according to Orientalists, they believe that Muslims are living in unchanging society because Muslims are traditional. They do not think about the future. They always think about the past or something like that. So Edward Said said these are one of the characters of Orientalism in the West. But as we have seen, Muslims' actions and beliefs are interacting with global changes. So we can find some sort of hybrid modernity in Indonesia, as well as in other parts of Muslim worlds, different from Western modernity. So Islamic modernity is shaped through the constant interactions between the modern and the traditional, the Western indigenous, the cosmopolitan and the local, the religious and the secular. So it is constantly on the move. So through the process of creative accommodation, human beings define themselves as modern beings and forge their own modernity. And I firmly believe with these materials that I have presented that Muslims are not an exception. So Muslims are also making their own modernity, which are quite different from the Western ones, but is the result of their efforts to be modern and at the same time to be religious. Yes, this is what I have prepared for today's lecture. And terima kasih banyak telah mendengar lecture saya. Then, because we did not have enough time to discuss, if you have any queries or if you have anything to communicate with me, just give me emails or you can contact me with WhatsApp. And this is the phone number of mine, and you can easily include my phone number as your friend list or something like that. Yes, that's it for today. Thank you. And I'll
Yes, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Bakim, for eye-opener discussion, because I really didn't aware that hijabers is also a sign of modernity in Indonesia, and probably bring it into the world as a sign of Muslim modernity, a sort of Muslim modernity in the world. And of course, in the financial sector, we will see that Islam also applies and applicable to such a transaction. So perhaps we will invite audience to ask comment and to ask question or comment to this lecture. I do encourage you to do it in English, but if you don't, you can use Indonesia as a medium for our communication. Please, is there anyone who would like to comment or ask a question? Hello?
If possible.
Yes, please.
Before some other also have a comment or a question. It's quite interesting what Prof. Kim already presented, but I'm a bit disappointed, Prof. Kim, because is it modernity? It's only about appearance, and also when appearance is presented by hijab or headscarf or something like that, is it only Muslimah or woman Muslim? It's changing. It's not the man Muslim or Muslim, something like that. So, and I am really looking forward. Modern Muslim, it's about the shifting of way of thinking, something like that. So Indonesian Muslim is more rational, is more feature oriented than others traditional way of thinking, something like that. So how about that, Prof. Kim? I would like to hear your response.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you for the question. And yes, of course, what I said was about appearance and about women.
Yeah.
But I believe that what changes in appearance has also the basis of ideas, which I did not discuss fully. But still, I believe that what you said, future-oriented ideas or something more rational or something like that, the changes how to wear is also based on that kind of ideas. And unfortunately, I did not have enough time to discuss it. And I think what Madede has a very important implication. I've never think about men, because we always talk about hijab, but we never talked about men. So in this sense, I think everyone may find out some ways how Muslim men they try to accommodate modern changes. For example, when we just look at some radical groups, they put jangos or Islamic clothes. So we are saying that they want to be Arab or something like that. It's traditional, it seems to be, but in some sense, I think in their ways of wearing Arabic clothes and in how they try to show their appearances, we can find out some similarities with hijabers. So I'm not sure. So if you can find out some the sort of proofs that they also try to be try to show themselves as handsome or show themselves as something like that, we can find out.
It's also then emerge important question then. Is it become Arabic? It's modern in Islam?
Yes.
I don't think so.
So we can find out some elements of modernity in the way the radicals try to show themselves off. So I've never thought about that, and I think it is a very important idea that men also try to show themselves as modern, even if they are radical or something like that. But still, the white clothes. There is a very interesting ideas from Korea that we are saying that sometimes Koreans think that their key symbol is white clothes. Back in our history, we are said that Koreans always love to wear white clothes. Some scholars say that about 100 years ago or 50 years ago, Koreans could not wear white clothes because white is a product of modern technology. At the time, it was not white. It is something. So the clothes by Rimbaud wearing today is white. But back 100 years ago, we cannot make clothes white enough. So Koreans are saying that we love to wear white clothes, but at the time, actually, it was not white, but something like white and yellow, or something white and black. So what I'm saying is that the radicals these days in Indonesia, they are wearing a very white clothes and embroidered, something like that. So in that sense, we can also find materials, how the Muslim men, especially the radicals or those want to follow Arabic fashion, have some ideas of new modernity or not. So I think, but that gives a very good inspiration on the matter. I never thought about how Muslim men try to wear their clothes in a very modernistic style or something like that.
Well, perhaps anyone else? Is there any? Oh, well, actually, I'd like to comment on the halal food and halal guts as the picture you have shown in your presentation. Why is it halal that make it popular now, even in America, where the people there are quite familiar with the Jewish teaching, which is quite similar with halal, which they call kosher. Why don't kosher? Why halal? That pick a new vibe in the modern America or modern New York there. So why don't they use kosher food or a Jewish concept of halal? Is there any explanation for that?
Maybe is the popularity of halal food is somewhat related to the Muslim population there. When they opened their restaurant, because they were also not that sure about whether halal food will works for Westerners or not. So they have to think about the consumers. So in that sense, halal has a much safe and wider basis of consumer rather than what Jews or they also have the similar ideas, but still I think because there are a lot of Muslims in New York or in America or in Europe, they usually open restaurants and make food for primarily for Muslims there. But after they opened that restaurant, they were also surprised to see that Westerners are coming because they have an idea that halal food it can be equated with cleanliness cleanness, healthy, or something like that. So in that sense, I think it is when we see from the perspective of shop owner, and it is better for them to open halal restaurants rather than other restaurants because they have some consumers. So it is an explanation from economic point of view, not from religious.
Yeah, because it is my experience. And when I go abroad, then if I could find halal food, then I prefer Jewish food because according to some of the Muslim teaching that we can eat all Jews eat. So kosher is very similar to our concept of halal. So that's the preference. But yeah, probably today is the popularity of Muslim, which formerly associated with terrible thing, terrorism or something, but they also have something that also attract the Westerners about this, and halal, probably something that interesting for them. Well, anyway, is there any other audience who like to ask question and comment? Probably I will invite Ibu Retno, Pak Arif, or other audience. Ibu Mila probably. You can, if you hesitate to use English, then you can use your own language. I mean, Pak Kim is also fluent in Indonesia, so please do. From the class, from our student, Safa?
Yeah, I want to comment about the halal stock study yang investment itu. So one of your slide talk about Bitcoin as halal investment, but MUI is Majelis Ulama Indonesia udah mendeklarasikan kalau Bitcoin itself sama kripto itu haram karena it is related to gambling. So mungkin belum update aja gitu, Prof.
Wow, thank you for the correction because I've heard the news that Bitcoin can be transacted in Indonesia. So and they got some sort of religious judgments from MUI. So I got wrong information. Thank you very much for your correction. And I think I can find out some other fatwa dari scholars luar Indonesia, and there are some who supported support the transaction of Bitcoin. But anyhow, MUI, I believe MUI has because I have this decision. I have to correct my previous statement. But anyway, so what I'm trying to say was that when a new change appears, the Muslims do not just make their judgments on their religious teaching. They think about a lot of circumstances. They deliberate on these circumstances and then make decisions. And these decisions are quite harmonious with the modern changes. So that was the idea that I tried to say. And unfortunately, Bitcoin was forbidden in Indonesia by MUI. So in that sense, I have to check again their decisions, why they have forbidden the use of Bitcoin in Indonesia. Thank you for your correction.
Anyone else, please? Ibu Retno, please.
Any comments and questions or whatever you want to say is welcome.
Yeah.
We have Mila.
Ibu Mila, please.
Terima kasih, ikut bergabung nih. Terima kasih Pak Rimbo, Bu Wati, Bu Dede. Hello, Prof. Kim. I'm Mila from Bandung. I would like to ask about what the definition of modernity. My question first. What the definition? Because I think we have some rules about Islamic issue, about hijab, about halal, about finance, and I would like to know about what the modernity and how modernity can side by side with the rule or Sharia. This is sometimes mixed example about hijab. I think we must wearing hijab for kesederhanaan itu apa ya? Maksudnya
simplicity, ya.
Simplicity ya. But in the fact we have many style and many style of hijab, and then how about the Syariah gitu? Is this a modern, or how about the Syariah? This is side by side or not? This my second question, and my third question is maybe this is out of topic because I would like to ask about the Islamic issue. Is the Islamic issue will side by side with indigenous knowledge in Indonesia? Because I have been working with the Department of Culture here, and I want to know because sometimes we have some problem if we have like rituals, like activity of the indigenous knowledge. Sometimes we afraid this is cannot match with the Islamic community here. Thank you.
Yes, the first the way how to define modernity is diverse and different, but I think the present condition of our life it can be called modern, and it is the characters in our life, present life, is called modernity. So back in 1990s, we started to talk about postmodernity. But actually, what I'm saying is that when we talk about postmodernity, it is also a one form of modernity at the time. So when we discussed about postmodernity, we are saying that conditions of modernity, something like certainty on our views is not that certain or something like that. So we all questions about basic premises of our life at the time. And we said that we have to go beyond modernity, and it is called a condition of postmodernity. But after that, we passed 20 years have passed, but still we are in the condition of modernity. So what I'm saying is the concept of modernity is relative. So back 20 years ago, at the time, we feel that we are living in the period of modernity. And now we are also thinking that we are living in the condition of modernity, something like that. So the characters that our life shows at this very moment is the characters of modernity. So that's the idea that I have concerning the definition of modernity. And about the second question, I definitely believe, the Sharia about hijab is quite diverse. So in that sense, I think the strength of Sharia is that you don't have a very strictly defined just one guideline on some problem. So in the case of hijab, as Mbak Mila said, we have interpretation saying that you have to wear it simple, and what moderately, something like that. But also this Sharia is not final. Sharia is always open to reinterpretation. I think it is the strength of Islamic teachings, and we can find a flexibility there. So when we said that you have to wear it simple and moderate, what is simple and moderate is different according to different groups. So to those who do some radical or some fundamental groups, you have to fully cover your face. That's the simple and moderate way. But to someone in the rural areas, and they're wearing, I don't know, in Java, we call it kerudung. Kerudung, yeah, the upper hairs are showing outside. But to them, yeah, it is a simple and moderate way of wearing jilbab, kerudung. So in that sense, sometimes one interpretation of Sharia dominates the masses, but still we have chances another alternative Sharia can emerge. So in that sense, I think competition of different interpretation exists in Indonesia. So hijabers, they can propose their own version of Sharia, even if these are opposed by some others. For example, NU and Muhammadiyah have different views on hijab, and MUI may have another version of Sharia, and radical groups, fundamental groups, they also have their own views. And what I am focusing was that hijabers, yeah, they are not that authoritative figures in Indonesian Islam. They are marginal ones, but hijabers have their own view on hijab. So these can be competed. These can be debated in Indonesia. So the radical groups cannot enforce their Sharia to hijabers. They can oppose. They can propose their opposition to hijabers wearing of hijab, but still hijabers can propose their own version of Islam, version of hijab. I think there's a very sound condition of Islam in Indonesia, and that's actually shows the modernity of ideas in Indonesia. So for example, we go to Pakistan or we go to Afghanistan, the alternative Sharia about hijab cannot be accepted. But in Indonesia, we have different versions and one cannot enforce others. So that's how modernity of discourse in Islamic discourse in Indonesia can be deployed in Indonesia. So I think still Indonesia is a plural and moderate and open society, because views of different ideas in Islamic teachings can be spread. So this is also connected to indigenous ideas, as we know that in the very strict sense of the term, indigenous knowledge, much of them does not have a firm basis in Sharia or a firm basis in scriptures. Yeah, that's right. But still, because of the flexibility of Sharia interpretation, I think indigenous customs and practices can be interpreted in Islamic terms. Of course, there may be some others who opposed, but still I believe, as was the case about hijab birth, the indigenous knowledges and practices can be Islamized, can be interpreted in Islamic terms. So in that sense, when some radical or fundamental groups look at the traditional ritual of Sunda or Java, they definitely say that, yeah, it's not Islamic. All of them should be abolished or should be wiped out. But their voice is just one voice, because there are some other voices like you, Mila, and Department of Culture, or other voices who support the presence of indigenous knowledge, indigenous practices. I think they can make their own Islamized version of ideas about indigenous practices. Because, I've done research in Java, and some of the, you may, I'm not sure whether Sunda, people in Sunda also practice Selamatan or something like that. Yeah, then of course, in Java, they always do Selamatan. And Selamatan, has an indigenous wisdom or something like that, heaps of traditions, but it is opposed clearly by the radical or scripturalist Muslims. But some of Islamic groups, some of the, actually what I'm saying, the Muhammadiyah members, they try to accommodate Selamatan into Islamic teachings. So in this, you may be surprised that. And also have done that. So in this sense, Selamatan, for example, when there is a Selamatan, the radical groups do not want to be involved in the sort of traditional ritual. But as you can see, the essence of Selamatan is to promote the solidarity among villagers. Of course, there are some other factors, but one of the essences that we can, lessons we can get from Selamatan is to promote the solidarity, the sameness among the neighbors or something like that. And these are the teachings that Islam also promotes. You have to love sesama manusia, it's something like that. So when they can bring Islamic teachings and indigenous ideas together, if you can find out the common ideas, I think most of Muslims in Indonesia, they are open and tolerant enough to accommodate the indigenous knowledge, indigenous wisdom and ideas. Yet, I'm not sure whether these can be a proper answer to your question, but anyway, thank you for Mbak Mila for your wonderful idea. Yeah.
Okay, there's another one here. Ibu Ratno is raising her hands. Prof. Ibu Ratno, you can do it yourself, please.
Ya, terima kasih Pak Rimbo. Thank you. I'm sorry I'm off cam. Mr. Kim, what is your opinion about religion transformation in the election process? Do you think there is a commodification in Islamic activity such as kelompok pengajian, that try to give more benefit to specific political party in Indonesia? Thank you.
Yes. Yes, we these days we are talking about commodification, yeah, definitely. But still, I'm more inclusive toward commodification or the religious consumption. So in that sense, yeah, these religious consumption has sometimes been mobilized by the political party, and sometimes, for example, what I think what I have in my mind was that some political parties or have some sort of organizing tours, and it is quite appropriate to traditional actions of wives, the middle-aged woman. They always love to go throwing together or something like that. So apart from that, we can find out heaps of problems of commodification. So for example, when you wear clothes or when you buy some religious items or something like that, yeah, it is getting getting expensive. And I've heard that there are jilbabs which cost more than 10 million or 20 million or something like that. So in this sense, if we use some critical perspective, we can say that these Muslims are fooled by the modern company who want to sell their products and who wants to use these commodities. But on the other hand, as I said before, I'm quite confident on the agency of human beings, including Muslims, a middle-aged Muslim woman. So when we look at from the surface appearance, yeah, it can be something like commodification. The religion became the items of commodity. But on the other hand, when we look at the meanings, I have not done interviews or research with these middle-aged women, but still I believe that when we look at the meanings they put into this commodity, I think, yeah, it is, yeah, definitely commodification. But on the other hand, they try to actively accommodate their ideas to their life. So when we think that people try to show off their appearance, then we are saying, yeah, it is quite natural feeling, desire. So in that sense, I think on the one hand, even if we can say it is commodification, on the other, we can say that they also put their agencies into their sort of consumption, consumerism. So I'm not sure whether it can satisfy your question or not, but that's at the moment what I can say.
Yeah. Okay. Ibu Retno, is there any following question or comment to that? Okay. I think Bu Retno is quite satisfied with your answers. Probably. Anyone else? We still have, at least 9 or 5 minutes for question and answer. Is there anyone of you who would like to comment or ask another question? Well, probably this is my comments. In our flyer, it stated that whether Islam can go side by side with modernity in Indonesia, and your lecture clearly indicate or show that the Islamic principle can go hand in hand or side by side with modernity in Indonesia and Malaysia, probably. But what makes these things that way? I mean, what this condition is applicable to Indonesia probably is that the practice of Sharia in Indonesia, which can embrace or allow other interpretation of Sharia, that, as you mentioned, there's no one try to impose the other, which is such condition also the characteristic of probably democracy, where one can also accept different view on something. This kind of interpretation of Sharia probably is hardly difficult to find it in Middle East or in Afghanistan, for instance. As you mentioned also that the way women should behave in the public sphere, they should have wearing burqa or something, and they cannot accommodate other alternative interpretation of that practice. So that this is the only one, and people, the population must follow this teaching. And I think some condition also applicable to some of the Northern African countries where certain certain view of religion or Sharia, it's supported not only by the population but also by power that cannot embrace or allow other interpretation of Sharia. So this modernity or this kind of practice is a sign of Islam and modernity in Indonesia, so that we can see that it seems that the practice of Islam in Indonesia could go side by side with modernity. So what do you think, Pak Kim?
Yeah, I think Rimbo excellently summarized what I was trying to say. So I have no comments. That I absolutely agree with your idea. And with this, I'm sometimes thinking that Indonesian Muslims should be proud of their conditions of what religiosity in Indonesia. And actually, I hope the condition of Indonesia should export to Middle East, should export to North Africa, so we can see more diverse and more tolerant and plural condition of Muslims' life in other parts of Islamic world. So some of the radical Muslims, fundamental Muslims, they always think that Indonesia have to import something from Arabs. That's their basic idea. But what I'm saying is that Indonesia and Malaysia have a lot to do export to the Arab world.
Yeah,
that's my idea, and this idea is based on what Rimbo have proposed before. So yeah, the condition of Indonesia is quite different in some sense, but it has been the product of the interaction between the modern changes and Islamic teachings in Indonesia. So I think that's the present condition, and we will see what will happen in the future in other paths, in other areas of life in Indonesia. Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you, Pak Kim. So this last 2 or 3 minutes, is there anyone who would like to comment or give some remarks before Pak Kim left for another class, probably?
Yeah.
Because after this, Pak Kim is already has another appointment with other class.
Yeah, a little more.
Okay, just quick comment or questions.
I will be very, very quick, hopefully, because as a Muslim, as Indonesian Muslim, I feel a bit. I will feel shameful if our modernity is only seen by our appearance, our norms in halal and economic Sharia, because for myself, modernity it's about way of thinking, how we perceive our behavior and something more than what's
material
in the surface. Yeah. So I think I think it's my comment.
Yeah,
thank you, Prof. Kim.
Yeah, thank you for your comments, and I try to
because
your ideas
my shameful is about this is how other people outside our country sees about Muslim in Indonesia. So for me it's just, oh boy, no, it's not like that. So it's so I hope it's more about the rationality, is but a way of thinking is about the perception of diversity.
Yep.
and others. Not I hope it's more about that. Thank you, Prof. Kim.
Thank you for your comments. And
yeah,
it's because appearance is much easier to approach rather than the
I can
ideas.
understand that. Yes.
So I'm sorry for my restriction. and I will do my best later.
But it's more about I see that's the way people see about our country, our Muslim, the Islam in Indonesia. So it's about, for me, it's about how to improve myself and others, something like that. Thank you, Prof. Kim.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, fortunately, Pak Kim has another appointment to attend. Then on behalf of the department, I'd like to thank Pak Kim for the series of lectures in our class, and hopefully we will see you soon, probably in May or June, or in the next semester if they're possible. Then we will organize a kind of lecture with other topic, of course. And we are eagerly to see Pak Kim in that. Ibu Wati has something to say, or just?
No, she's driving.
Oh, no. No, I think you're still muting.
Oh, yes. Sorry. I follow the Pak Kim's lecture, but because I was in the bank, so I didn't give any remarks or any questions. But I'm so happy. I'm also relieved that Pak Kim has been with us for the following 4 weeks, I think. And Pak Kim will be with us in the coming semester, yeah, Pak Kim. And I have informal agreement actually with Pak Kim. We are going to do research or in Korea or in Indonesia. Yeah, Pak Kim?
Yep.
Okay.
We are going to write down together as a team what research about we are going to do. Now that is our next work, Ms. Pak Kim, Pak Rimbo. Thank you, Pak Kim.
Thank you.
Thank you. I won't keep you here in class, Pak Kim. Please accept our apology for overtime here. Thank you, and see you.
Thank you, everyone.
In the future.
See you.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Keep healthy, Pak Kim.
So, itu Pak Kim. Sebetulnya menurut kesepakatan Pak Kim masih ada satu sesi, tapi saya nggak tahu, mungkin saya harus konsultasi dengan Ibu Wati atau Ibu Rina, apakah memungkinkan sebagai rekapitulasi di akhir kuliah ini Pak Kim kita undang juga untuk semacam summary dan juga rekapitulasi perkuliahan begitu ya. Tapi mudah-mudahan kalau itu memungkinkan, kita akan set up jadwalnya dengan Pak Kim. Kalaupun tidak, ya ini mungkin semester ini pertemuan terakhir dengan Pak Kim, tapi tentu di arena lain kita ketemu dan ngobrol dengan Pak Kim. Saya akan tunggu policy-nya dari Prodi dan Departemen tentang ini, dan selanjutnya kita tutup perkuliahan kita. Terima kasih, selamat siang.